I don't want to be the boss. Some of you know a bit of my background and a bit of my story. I traveled for somewhere between 15 and 20 years. I traveled around the country with my dad and my brother singing gospel music, and it was a dream come true for me. Our group came off the road, and when we did, shortly thereafter, I went to work for the guy who was running for governor. He was a congressman from over in central Kentucky. He was running for governor. And Congressman Fletcher and I came over to this part of the world several times, as a matter of fact, while he was a candidate, while he was governor and everything else. When he got elected, he asked me to come to Frankfort with him and to be the executive director of the governor's mansion. Be honest with you, I didn't even know there was such a job. I guess I just figured that the house ran itself, or why not the first lady? You know? But they asked me to come and manage, be the executive director of the governor's mansion. And I tell everybody all the time, it's the absolute best job in all of state government. You get to play house all day and throw parties at night, you know, which is not a bad way to do things. But one of my all-time favorite things that we were able to do while we were there was to continue a tradition that First Lady Judy Patton had started long before we got there. It's an event called the Celebration of Hope, and Mrs. Patton started it because it was a very, very dear thing to her heart. Basically, what we did was the First Lady, really, of Kentucky, and I'm grateful that Mrs. Bashir is continuing this tradition and this event. But the First Lady of Kentucky invites breast cancer survivors from all across the Commonwealth of Kentucky to come to Frankfort for one day. And usually when we were having the event, we would always host it the Monday before the Kentucky Derby. So it was usually about the end of April or the 1st of May. And we would invite all of the breast cancer survivors from all across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Some of them were ladies, and there were actually a few men who battled this disease as well. They would all come to Frankfort, Kentucky on this one day, thousands of them. And we had this great big tent set up, and we had it all set up just for them. And while they were there, we would feed them, and we would sing to them, and we would have motivational speakers speak to them, and we would give them gifts, and then we would feed them some more, and then we would sing to them some more, then we'd speak to them some more, and we would love on them, and we would encourage them, because these ladies and these men had been dealing with the fight, literally, of their lives. And they were survivors. They were living to tell about it. And we had this day set aside just to celebrate with them. One of my favorite parts of that event, and one of my favorite jobs while I was at the governor's mansion, was to be able to host and MC this event. And one of the things that we always did was we would ask everyone who was there, all of the survivors who were there, and there were thousands of them, we would say, how many of you have recently been diagnosed? Within the last, let's say, year, you've been recently diagnosed. Stand up. We would have several dozen, sometimes maybe a couple of hundred people who would stand up. And everyone else who was seated, we would applaud them, and we would love on them and encourage them and just remind them that there is a way to beat this disease. Then I would say, if you've been diagnosed between 1 and 5 years, stand up. And then the next group would stand up, and we would applaud them, and we would love on them. Now I'd say somewhere between 5 and 10 years, and they would stand up. Between 10 and 20 years, and then they would stand up. There was one lady there who was up in years, and when everyone else had had their chance to stand, she still hadn't stood. And finally, I think I said something like, if you've been a breast cancer survivor for over 40 years, would you stand up? And this one woman stood up. And she told us that she had been battling the disease and was a survivor of, I believe, if I remember right, she said over 55 years that she had survived this terrible disease. Well, of course, it was hope for everyone else who was there that you could fight this disease and win this battle. And she had won the battle. And then when someone asked her, why is it that you think you've been able to survive so long with this disease? She immediately said, without missing a breath, that it was her faith. She knew that God was the sustainer of life and the giver of health and every good thing. And so she just thanked God for it. Then I had an opportunity to sing this song to that tent full of thousands of breast cancer survivors. Started singing this song, and I noticed where the little lady was sitting over here on this side. I got about halfway through the song, or about a quarter of the way through the song, and she slipped her hand up and she started worshiping. And I thought, wow, this could get interesting, you know, here on the property of the governor's mansion and at the state capitol. And then I noticed that somebody over here slipped their hand up, and then somebody back there slipped their hand up, and then before you knew it, there were several hands in the air, and then this little lady stood up and raised both of her hands and started worshiping the Lord, and then this other lady stood up and started worshiping the Lord, and then it was just kind of like salt and pepper, and they all just got up and started worshiping the Lord, and it turned into a worship event. It turned into church, basically. It turned in. I'm standing there thinking, this did get interesting, and what's really, really cool about all of this is our tax dollars are paying for it. They're going to pay for something. They might as well pay for something good like that and worship. And it was the most beautiful experience. And I believe that's probably when it occurred to me most. It was like an epiphany. It was an all of a sudden thing for me. All of my life I've believed that grace is the thing that saved us, but never gave grace a whole lot more credit beyond that. And now I'm convinced that it's grace that saves us and keeps us and sustains us and gives us joy. And when we've lost that one that we love, that gives us courage and gives us strength and gives us comfort. Grace is all of those things. And that's the reason tonight that I've come to sing about and to talk about grace. We need lots of things. We need revival. We really need revival. But what we need even more than we need revival is a true revelation and realization of God's grace. I believe Max Lucado said one time, Max Lucado is one of my all-time favorite Christian writers. Max Lucado said one time, he's convinced that the reason that we are the ineffective believers and witnesses and Christians that we are is probably because we've forgotten the tragedy of being lost. We've forgotten how lonely we were. We've forgotten how desperate we were. We've forgotten how lost we were when we were lost. I may be here tonight singing to the choir, I don't know. But if that's the case, I hope that I can remind you somewhere through the course of this night about the goodness and the grace of God. And if it's okay with you, just because I like that song and it ministers to me and it touches me, I'd like to share it again and think about the grace that you've experienced in your own life. How many days have I seen sorrow? How many nights have I cried? How many friends have I lost to tomorrow? How many of my dreams have died? More than I ever imagined, more than I thought there could be. More of His grace each day He sends to me. That's more than amazing. It's unbelievable, never ending and free. His grace is so much more than amazing to me. Na, 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 na. How many times have I strayed from the pathway? How many tales have I spun? How many words have been taken the wrong way? How many wrongs have I done? More than I care to remember, more than I thought there could be. More of His grace each day He sends to me. That's more than amazing. It's unbelievable, never ending and free. His grace is so much more than amazing to me. Na, 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 na. More of His grace each day He sends to me. That's more than amazing. It's